Namaskaram. During the last couple of meetings, I spoke about Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, which is the very heart of Bhagavan's teachings. But this time I'm going to talk more about Nāṉ Ār, which is a very that is Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu and Nāṉ Ār, a very complementary text. Nāṉ Ār is a very good introductory text to Bhagavan's teachings, but though it's an introductory text, it's also a very deep text. There's a lot of very, very deep meaning in it. But it is a good introduction. As everyone knows, it was originally that is Shiva Prakasham Pillai in about 1901 or 1902, asked Bhagavan a series of questions, and he recorded the answers. In those days, Bhagavan was talking very little, so some of the answers he may have given by word of mouth, but many he gave just by either writing on the sand, the sandy ground, or by Shiva Prakasham Pillai sometimes gave him a slate and chalk, and Bhagavan would write on the slate, or he gave him slips of paper, and Bhagavan would write on the slips of paper. So Shiva Prakasham Pillai recorded the answers he got from Bhagavan. And many, many years later, more than 20 years later, these were first published as an appendix to a biography, but Shiva Prakasham Pillai had written of Bhagavan in verse form, Ramana Kendra. So it first appeared as an appendix to Ramana Kendra. Then it became so popular that it was published as a separate book. And the main form in which it was published in the early days was in the form of 30 questions and answers and some miscellaneous sayings of Bhagavan. In about 1926 or 27, Bhagavan himself rewrote it in the form of an essay because it's such an important work. And when doing so, he refined it and he removed some scope for ambiguity or confusion that was there in the question and answer version. Maybe sometimes Shiva Prakasham Pillai didn't record entirely accurately. But anyway, Bhagavan refined it in the essay version. And when he wrote the essay version, he wrote an entirely new first paragraph. That is, in the 30 question and answer version, there was a small introductory paragraph, which was Nāṇ Ār Engira Vicharanaye Mokshate Kodikum. That means the investigation, who am I? The investigation here means vichara, but vichara, who am I? Alone will give moksha. But Bhagavan replaced that with the paragraph that he with the first paragraph of the essay version, which is a very, very important paragraph, because this is the very this is the very basis of Bhagavan's teachings. That is, what he says in this first paragraph is Sakala Jivagalum Dukumem Badindri Epodum Sukamai Irika Virumbuvadalam. That means, since all sentient beings want or like to be happy, to be always happy without what is called misery. That is, the one thing we are all seeking is happiness, both the sinner and the saint, from the lowest form of life, from the ants or insects or whatever, up to the highest gods in heaven. What are all jivas seeking? By seeking one thing and one thing alone, happiness. Why some of us are sinners and some of us are saints? Because the sinners happen to be looking for happiness in the wrong place. Saints are getting closer to finding where happiness should be, where we should seek happiness. That is the difference. But we are all seeking happiness and happiness alone. That is the first clause. Second clause, he says, Yavakum taniditilaye parama priyam irapadalam. That means for everyone, since for everyone, the greatest love is only for oneself. And he puts a double emphasis on for oneself. In Tamil, it's tanidatil. That literally means in oneself, but in English, we say for oneself. So the greatest love that we all have is only for ourselves. He emphasized that very strongly. That's the second clause. The third clause, he says, Priyataku Sukhame Karanmadalalam. That means, since happiness alone is the cause for love, that is, we love those things that we think will contribute to our happiness, and we dislike those things which we think will detract from our happiness or obstruct our happiness. So what makes us love anything is happiness. There's a reason he says this here, because in the previous clause he said we have greatest love for ourselves, and happiness is the cause of love. So what does that imply? Since we love ourselves more than anything else, that is one reason why, that is one explanation Bhagavan is giving, one argument Bhagavan is giving, why happiness is our real nature. If we love only those things that make us happy, and of all things we love ourselves most of what we love most of all is ourselves, that is because we ourselves are happiness, is the implication there. So he begins with these three since clauses. So these are, he's giving here arguments why happiness is our real nature. Then he goes on and he gives another argument, but not as a since clause, as a relative clause. That is what he says in the remaining portion of the sentences. Manamatra nidrail dinum anubhavikum tan subhabhamana at chukate adeya tanne Nāṉ Ār. What that means is, in order to obtain that happiness, which is one's own nature, one's own svabhava, which one experiences daily in sleep, which is devoid of mind. That is, in sleep, we are perfectly happy. We are devoid of, not only of mind, we're devoid of everything. We alone exist in sleep. Nothing else exists with us. We are in sleep alone, and we are perfectly happy. What does that mean? If we are perfectly happy when devoid of everything else, what is happiness other than ourselves? It's only ourselves. So this is another reason why, another argument he gives to show that happiness is our real nature. So happiness is our real nature. Why? Firstly, because we all have greatest love for ourselves, and happiness alone is the cause of love. Secondly, because it's our own experience. We experience a perfect happiness every day in dreamless sleep, in spite of being separated from everything else. So our happiness doesn't depend on anything other than ourselves. We ourselves are happiness. So how to attain that happiness? The answer he gives is tanne Nāṉ Ār. It is necessary for oneself to know oneself. That is, since happiness is our real nature, we can experience happiness only by experiencing our real nature. In other words, we need to know what we actually are. We need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. And then that's the first sentence. Then the second and final sentence of this paragraph, he says, Adaku nana ennum Jnana-vichara me mukhya sadhanam. For that means for knowing oneself, Nāṇ ennum Jnana-vichara, the Jnana-vichara, the awareness investigation, who am I, alone is the mukhya sadhanam, the principal means. In what sense is it the principal means? He explains that later on in the work, but what Bhagavan often said is, whatever other path we may follow, it can only take us to a certain extent. All other paths eventually have to merge in this path of self-investigation. That is, all other paths are mere tributaries. The main river is this path of self-investigation. This path of self-investigation alone will take us to the ocean of bliss that is our real nature. Why is that? Because happiness is our own real nature. To know, So to experience happiness, the fullness of infinite happiness, we need to experience ourselves as we need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. And how to be aware of ourselves as we actually are? Only by attending to ourselves. So long as our attention is directed away from ourselves, we are not aware of ourselves as we actually are. Only when our attention is turned back towards ourselves. So whatever other path we may follow, whether bhakti or yoga or whatever path it may be, sooner or later, in order to know ourselves as we actually are, we need to investigate ourselves. And he refers to this investigation here as Jnana-vichara. Jnana here means awareness. What awareness is he referring to? Only the fundamental awareness I am. So that is what we need to investigate, this fundamental awareness I am. So that's why he calls it Jnana-vichara. So this is an introduction to this work, Nāṉ Ār. It's also a perfect introduction to the whole of Bhagavan's teachings. That is, who is there who will deny that they are seeking happiness? Whatever else we may be seeking, whether we're seeking wealth or social status or learning or whatever it may be, whatever we are seeking those things because we think they will make us happy. So ultimately, all desires are the fundamental desire, which is inherent in every other desire, is the desire for happiness. And that desire for happiness is not wrong, because happiness is our real nature. So desire for happiness is love for our real nature. The problem is we think that happiness is something other than ourselves, that it lies outside ourselves, and so we seek things other than ourselves. But if we want to be happy, as Bhagavan says later in the 14th paragraph, there's not an iota of happiness in any of the things of the world. Happiness is our own real nature. Happiness is what we actually are. So to experience the fullness of infinite happiness, which is our own real nature, we need to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. So this is what Bhagavan's teachings are all about. Bhagavan asks us only one thing of us: be happy. But how to be happy is the question. Bhagavan has made it clear that we cannot be happy so long as we allow our mind to go outwards. In order to be happy, we have to turn back within and surrender ourselves back to our own reality, to that which is always shining in our heart as I. So that's all Bhagavan asks of us, is to be happy. So then we come to the first question that Shiv Prakasham Pillai asked. The first question he asked was, Nāṉ Ār, which means who am I? And to which Bhagavan replied, Arive Nān. Arive Nān means awareness alone is I. Later, when Shiv Prakasham Pillai copied all Bhagavan's answer in his notebook, and for his own clarification, he added, because before coming to Bhagavan, he had studied philosophy at university. So he was much interested in philosophy, particularly Advaita philosophy. That's what prompted him to ask this question, this fundamental question, who am I? So Bhagavan gave a very direct and simple answer. Who am I? Awareness alone is I. But to understand it for his own clarification, he added what he had learned in university, which is basically the neti, but that this body composed of 7 dhatus is not I. The 5 jnanendriyas are not I. The 5 karmendriyas are not I. The 5 vayus, the pancha vayus, the 5 pranas are not I. The mind which thinks is not I. He listed all these things. When before it was first published, Shiv Prakasham Pillai had a nephew, Manikam Pillai, who served him very devotedly throughout his life. And Manikam Pillai brought the manuscript to Bhagavan to get Bhagavan's approval for publishing it. So when he brought it and showed it to Bhagavan, when Bhagavan saw it, he said, oh, I didn't say all this, referring to this neti portion. Then Bhagavan himself said, oh, because he had studied philosophy, because he was familiar with this traditional way of understanding it, he would have added this for his own clarification. Let it remain. It may be useful for people, but it's important to be aware Bhagavan didn't list all these things as this is what is said in all the old sastras. Bhagavan went straight to the point. Bhagavan didn't, when he was asked, who am I? He didn't say what we are not. He went straight to the point. Awareness alone is I. But for Shiva Prakashan Pillai's own clarification, he added this, and Bhagavan decided to retain it here. But when Bhagavan wrote it as an essay, he put his own answers in bold. That actually, when he wrote it by pen, he underlined in red. He underlined the question, who am I, in red, and he underlined the answer, awareness alone is I, in red. And then the next question Shiva Prakashan Pillai asked is, what is the nature of that Aribu, that awareness? And Bhagavan said, Satchidananda. So in the essay form, Bhagavan wrote it as Arivin Sarupam Satchidanandam. The Sarupa, the real nature of awareness, is Satchidananda. The next question Shiva Prakashan Pillai asked is, Sarupa Darshanam epodum kedekam. When will the Sarupa Darshana, when will awareness of one's own real nature, or literally seeing one's own real nature, when will that be attained? The answer that it's recorded in the question and answer version to that was Drisya Mahahir Jagam Niki Vidatu Drikahir Sarupa Darshanam Undaham. That means when the world which is seen is removed, the seeing of Sarupa, which is the Drik, will arise or will come into being. Bhagavan didn't include this sentence, partly because this Drikahya Sarupam is a little bit confusing, because our real nature is not Vasya. Vasya, as Bhagavan clarified in so many other places, is only ego. So what I suspect Bhagavan said was Drikin Sarupam, that is the real nature of Vasya, not our real nature, which is Vasya, but the real nature of Vasya. I think that's probably what Bhagavan would have said. But anyway, he didn't put it exactly like that. So this was the question: how will it be? When will we have experience of darshanam of our own real nature? And Bhagavan answered that when the experience of the world is removed, when the world is removed, then the Swarupa Darshana will arise. And Shiva Prakashan Pillai then asked, will not Swarupa Darshana arise so long as the world exists? And Bhagavan said, Uļḷadu, it will not. And then he asked why. So we now come to what Bhagavan retained in the third paragraph. What he says in the third, that was the context in which this third paragraph is given. That is, Shiva Prakashan Pillai wanted to know when will I attain, or what are the conditions necessary for experiencing our real nature? And Bhagavan, this is the answer basically, but Bhagavan gives. In this third paragraph, he begins by saying, if the mind, which is the cause for all awareness and all activity, ceases, Jagat Drishti, perception of the world, will cease or will depart. Here, what he means when he said the mind is the cause for all awareness, awareness here means awareness of things other than ourselves. That is, it's only the mind which knows all other things. And it knows all other things, and it's the doer of all activities. That is, action rises only with the rising of the mind. So the mind is both the knower of all things and also the doer of all actions, is the implication here. So only when that mind ceases, here when he says the mind, when he implies the mind is the knower, it's ego he's referring to. It's the perceiving aspect of the mind. And then he goes on to explain, just as unless awareness of the imaginary snake goes, awareness of the rope will not arise. That is, so long as we are seeing the rope, as a snake, we cannot see it as a rope. When we see it as a rope, we cannot see it as a snake. We cannot see it as both a snake and a rope at the same time. Either we know clearly it is only a rope, therefore it is not a snake, or if we see it, so long as we see it as a snake, we are not recognizing that it is a rope. So just like that, unless perception of the world, which is kalpita, a fabrication, departs, darshana of Swarupa, which is the adhisthana, will not arise. So we just like the rope is the adhisthana, it's the basis for the appearance of the snake. Our own real nature is the basis for the appearance of the world. But so long as we are seeing the world, we are not seeing ourselves as we actually are. When we see ourselves as we actually are, we no longer see the world, is the implication. The reason for this is, as Bhagavan explained, for example, in verse 4 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, he says, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? If oneself is a form here means if we rise as ego, because the nature of ego, when we rise as ego, we always take the form of the body as ourself. And so long as we are aware of ourselves as the form of the body, we're aware of so many other forms. In other words, that's why he said the world and God will be likewise. So long as we take ourselves to be a form, we cannot know that which is formless. Though God's real nature is formless, we cannot know God as formless so long as we take ourselves to be the form of a body. But if oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? So the basis for the appearance of the world is the ego. And ego is nothing but the false awareness, I am this body. So long as we are seeing the world, we are aware of ourselves as I am this body. And so long as we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, we're not aware of ourselves as we actually are. That's why he said, Sarupa Darshana cannot be attained so long as we are seeing the world. Because when we see the world, we're aware of ourselves as a body. Then in the next paragraph, he goes on to explain the same idea in more detail. He says, what is called mind is an Adiseya Shakti, an extraordinary power that exists in Atma-swarupa. It makes all thoughts appear. That means the mind makes all thoughts appear. When one looks, excluding all thoughts, or removing or putting aside all thoughts, solitarily, there's no such thing as mind. Therefore, thought alone is the swarupa of the mind. That is, the very nature of the mind is thought. There's no such thing as mind apart from thoughts, and there's no thoughts apart from mind. And then he goes on to say, to relate it to what he was saying in the previous paragraph, excluding thoughts, there is not separately any such thing as world. That is, the world is nothing, as he says in verse 6 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, the world is nothing but the 5 kinds of sense data. That is, the world consists of what? Sights, sounds, tactile sensations, tastes, and smells. If you remove these 5, where is there any world? So the world is nothing, the implication is the world is nothing but our perception of it. So, but just like in a dream, we see a world consisting of sight, sounds, touch, tactile sensation, tastes, and smells. We see a world just like this world. We see a world in dream. But what is that world we see in the dream? It is nothing but our own thoughts. It's a mental fabrication. Likewise, Bhagavan said this present world is just a dream. It's just a mental fabrication. And then he goes on to say, in sleep there are no thoughts, and there is also no world. In waking and dream, there are thoughts, and consequently, there is also a world. Consequently is not there, but the implication consequently is implied there. That is, the world and thoughts appear together, in other words. And then he goes on to say, just as a spider spins out thread from within itself and draws it back into itself, so the mind makes the world appear from within itself and again dissolves it back into itself. Here, this analogy Bhagavan uses here of the spider spinning out thread from within itself and drawing it back into itself. This is an analogy. It's I think it dates back to the Upanishads. Even in some Upanishad, this analogy is given. But how this analogy is generally understood, it is said that Brahman or Atman, our real nature, spins out the world. But Bhagavan clarifies here, it's not our real nature as such does not project the world. It is only the mind that projects the world. It's only when we rise as ego, our ego mind, that we project this world. So it is the mind that is projecting the world out of itself and that is drawing the world back into itself. That is, as soon as we wake up in the morning or begin to dream, we project a world. As soon as we subside back into self, we absorb that world back into ourself. In other words, the world has no existence independent of the mind, but sees it. It is just a mental fabrication. And then he says, when the mind comes out from Atma-swarupa means our own real nature, the real nature of oneself. When the mind comes out from Atma-swarupa, the world appears. Therefore, when the world appears, Swarupa, our own real nature, does not appear. And when Swarupa appears, the world does not appear. And then he says, if one goes on investigating the nature of the mind, oneself alone will end as mind. That means if we investigate ourselves keenly enough, we will recognize that what is appearing as mind is nothing but ourself. And he then clarifies what he means by oneself here. What is here called Nāṉ, that means oneself, is only Atma-swarupa. That is, in this context, he's using Nāṉ, he's using the word oneself to refer to our real nature. So if we go on investigating the nature of the mind, we will find that it is our own real nature that appears as mind. The mind is nothing other than our own real nature. It's only when we face outwards, mind seems to be something other than the pure awareness that we actually are. And then he goes on to say, the mind stands only by always going after stūlam. Going after here means attaching itself to something gross. In other words, it's only by attaching itself to a body, but the mind can stand. Solitarily, it does not stand. The mind alone is described as Sukshma Sarira, the subtle body, and Jiva, the soul. And in the next paragraph, he goes on to analyze the mind a bit deeper. Then we'll come on to the actual practice. What he says in this fifth paragraph is, whatever it is that rises in this body as I, that alone is mind. What does he mean here by rising in this body? It's not literally, but the body exists there. The mind is something that rises in the body. That is, as soon as the mind arises, it projects and identifies itself with the body. So rising in this body as I means taking this body to be, it implies taking this body to be I. So that I which is aware of itself as I in this body, that alone is mind. If one investigates in what place the thought called I first appears in the body, one will come to know it's in the heart. This is misunderstood by some people to mean, because some people take the heart to be a place in the body. Those sometimes, for the sake of those who were thinking only in terms of the body, Bhagavan sometimes said the heart, the center from which I rises, is 2 digits of right from the center of the chest. That is only relative to the body. That is not what the real meaning of the word heart. As he made clear in so many other places, heart is I am. Heart is the center. Heart is what is innermost. In Tamil, the word for heart is Uḷḷam, which means what is within. In Sanskrit, Hridayam means this is the center. So the very center of everything, the innermost core of everything, that is the heart. And that is our fundamental awareness I am. That's what Bhagavan means by heart. So if we investigate in what place, though he says in what place, he often uses, he often talks metaphorically about our real nature as the place from which ego rises. It's not literally a place in time and space. A place is usually in a metaphorical sense. So if one investigates in what place means that if we investigate from what or from where the thought I rises, it rises obviously only from ourself, from our heart, from the very center of our being. It's not referring to a place in the body. Though he says it first appears in the body. Why? Because we take this body to be I. When we rise as ego, we always take a body to be I. That is what he means there. And then he says, referring to heart, that alone is the birthplace of the mind. Aduve manatin pirapidum. Pirapidum means the birthplace of the mind. The source, the place from which the mind arises. And then he goes on to give a practical clue. Even if one continues thinking I, it will take and leave one in that place. That is what he means by continuously thinking I. It's not just merely repeating the word mentally. That is, whenever we mention any word, it brings a certain thing to our mind. If we say apple, it brings a certain object to our mind. If we say car, it brings a certain object to our mind. If we say tree, it brings a certain object to our mind. If we say running, it brings a certain action to our mind. So every word refers to something. So if we are thinking I, what is it that this word I is referring to? Merely repeating the word I without attending to that which it refers to will not lead us to the heart. But Bhagavan suggests thinking of this is a very good, useful clue when one begins on the path of self-investigation, when one's trying to become familiar with what it is to be self-attentive, to hold on to that awareness I am. Just thinking I slowly and meditatively and trying to attend to that awareness which is denoted by the word I, that is a very useful clue. So that will take one to, that will draw one's attention back to the heart, is what it implies. And then he says, because up till now he's been using the term mind. So what is this mind? He said it's thoughts alone are mind, he said in the previous paragraph. But here he goes on to say something more. He says, of all the thoughts that appear or arise in the mind, the thought called I alone is the first thought. He says the same thing in verse 18 of Upadēśa Undiyār. Enangle manam, thoughts alone are mind. Of all thoughts, the moolam, the root, is this thought called I. In verse 18, he calls it moolam, the root. Here he calls it mudal ninebu, the first thought. So of all thoughts, the first thought is the thought called I. What he calls the thought called I is ego. Why is it the first thought? Because all other thoughts are objects. The thought I is the subject. Objects cannot exist except in the view of the subject. So all other thoughts depend upon their semi-existence, upon the semi-existence of this first thought I. That's only when we rise as ego, but we're aware of other thoughts. So ego is that which is aware of all other thoughts. So this is the first thought. Why does he call ego a thought? Because according to Bhagavan, everything other than our real nature, the pure awareness I am, is a thought. Ego is what? It's a mixture of that pure awareness and adjuncts, this body. So as ego, we're aware of ourselves as I am this body. Though there's a real element there, the fundamental awareness I am, it's mixed up with the body, which is only a thought. Because the body is an object. All objects are thoughts. So because it's a mixture of what is real and what is unreal, it itself is, as that mixture, it is unreal. So it is just a thought. So here he says, of all thoughts, the thought called I alone is the first thought. Then he says, only after this rises do other thoughts rise. Why? Because only after the subject rises can there be objects. There cannot be objects without the subject. And then he said the same thing using different terms. Instead of using the terms first thought and the thought called I and other thoughts, he talks about the first person and second and third persons. The first person means ego, the first thought I, and second and third persons means all other thoughts, all other things. So only after the first person appears do second and third persons appear. In sleep, the first person, ego, doesn't appear, so no second or third person, nothing other than ourself appears in sleep. And then he says, without the first person, second and third persons do not exist. That implies without this ego, nothing else exists. That nothing else means no objects exist, no phenomena exist, no forms exist. When we don't rise as ego, what exists is only the fundamental awareness I am, which is not a second or third person. It's not something other than ourselves. It is what we actually are. So he's now laid the ground. Now he comes on to the actual practice. I will talk about this, and then I won't go, or I'll talk about part of this paragraph and then two more paragraphs to explain the practice very clearly, and then I'll answer any questions that any of you may have. What he says in the beginning of the sixth paragraph, he says in a very forceful manner, with he says, Nāṇ Ār vicharane inaleye manum adangam. That is, the mind will cease or subside or be subdued only by the investigation, who am I? And to emphasize only, he doesn't say, he puts the suffix a is an intensifier that implies only, but he uses it twice here. Vicharane inal means by vichara. Vicharane inale means only by vichara. Vicharane inaleye means only by vichara. So he's putting a double emphasis there. This is the only means. It's only by investigating who am I, but the mind will cease. Right? The mind will cease to exist. And then in the next sentence, he says, the thought, who am I? Here, he's using the term thought here metaphorically. That is, he's referring to the investigation, who am I? Investigation, who am I means turning our attention back towards ourselves. He's here referring to that as a thought, the thought, who am I? He's using it in a metaphorical sense, but it's not literally a thought. When our attention goes towards other things, that is thought. When our attention turns back towards ourselves, all thoughts subside. But metaphorically, he's describing it as a thought. So he says, the thought, who am I, destroying all other thoughts, will itself also, in the end, be destroyed like a corpse burning stick. That is, when a funeral pyre is lit, in order to keep the fire burning fiercely and to ensure that the corpse is burnt in completely, a stick is used to stir it and to make sure that nothing falls out, but the whole fire continues to burn fiercely. And when the corpse is thoroughly burnt, then the funeral pyre itself becomes extinguished, and the stick that was used for stirring it is also burnt along with it. So just like that, the thought, who am I, will destroy all other thoughts, and in the end itself will also be destroyed. What does he mean here? The thought, who am I, is the effort that we make to be self-attentive. That is, so long as we rise as ego, the natural flow of our attention is to go outwards, away from ourselves, towards other things. When we are investigating ourselves, we are turning our attention away from other things, back towards ourselves. So this requires effort, because so long as we rise as ego, we have Vishaya Vasanas, and the Vishaya Vasanas, Vishaya Vasanas means our inclination to attend to Vishayas, to things other than ourselves. So those are constantly impelling our attention to go outwards. So effort is required in order to turn our attention back and to hold on to self-attentiveness. So that effort that we make to be self-attentive is what he refers to here metaphorically as the thought, who am I? So that effort must continue until this ego is completely destroyed, just like but you have to continue stirring the funeral pyre until the corpse is completely destroyed. In order to, until this ego is completely eradicated, we need to persevere in this investigation, this practice of self-attentiveness. Who am I? But in the end, when ego is destroyed, then who is left to attend to anything? Or to make any effort? So the effort to attend to ourself must continue until ego is eradicated. When ego is eradicated, what remains is pure awareness. Then there's no more effort. It is our natural state. It is sahaja sthiti. Being aware of ourself as ourself is our natural state. So long as even the slightest trace of ego remains, we need to persevere in this practice. As Bhagavan says later in the 11th paragraph, so long as there are Vishaya Vasanas in the mind, so long this investigation, who am I, is necessary. So how to invest? What exactly does Bhagavan mean by the investigation, who am I? He then clarifies. If other thoughts rise, without trying to complete them, it is necessary to investigate to whom they have occurred. That is, what does he mean here by other thoughts? As he said in a couple of paragraphs earlier, the whole world is nothing but thoughts. So all phenomena, all forms are thoughts. So long as we are aware of anything other than ourselves, that is the rising of a thought. So if other thoughts rise means if our attention is diverted away from ourselves towards other things, that is the rising of a thought. So if other thoughts rise, we shouldn't try to complete them. If we begin to think about what am I going to do when I go to office tomorrow, or what shopping do I have to do? That is, thoughts are always concerning things are always about things other than ourselves. And as soon as one thought starts, it leads on to a train of thoughts. We tend to follow the thoughts. So Bhagavan says, without trying to complete it, it's necessary to investigate to whom they've occurred. Investigating to whom they've occurred, what does that mean? A thought is our attention going outwards, away from ourselves. When we investigate to whom it's occurred, we are turning our attention back towards ourselves. So instead of following the thoughts, allowing our attention to flow away from ourselves, we need to bring it back and fix it on ourselves. That's what he means by it's necessary to investigate to whom it's occurred. That is, whatever thought may arise, to whom does this thought appear? We don't actually have to ask the question. Sometimes it may be helpful to remind us. Asking the question, asking the question can be a way of reminding us to turn our attention back to ourselves. But he doesn't actually say ask to whom they've occurred. He says investigate. That means we've got to turn our attention back to face ourselves alone. And then he says, however many thoughts arise, what? That implies, what's it matter? Or so what? However many thoughts arise, so what? Big deal is the implication. It's not we don't have to be concerned about thoughts. However many rise, what's it matter? As soon as each thought appears, if one vigilantly investigates to whom it has appeared or to whom it has occurred, it will be clear to me. If one thus investigates who am I, the mind will return to its birthplace. The same term he used in the previous paragraph, when he talked about the heart. He said that is the birthplace of the mind. The heart means the birthplace of the mind means the source from which we've risen. In other words, our own real nature. That is the heart. That is the fundamental awareness I am. So as soon as each thought appears, if one vigilantly investigates to whom it has occurred, it will be clear to me. In other words, our attention will have been turned back to ourselves. Ah, yes, we are reminded of our own existence. Our attention, which was going out away from ourselves towards other things, is again brought back to ourselves. Yes, to me, it occurs to me. So we hold on to this I. Holding on to this me is investigating who am I. So he says, if one investigates who am I, that is, if we hold on to that self-attentiveness, the thought which the mind will return to its birthplace. That is, the mind which was facing outwards will again turn back to face itself. And then he says, the thought that had risen will also cease. Why will the thought cease? Thoughts cannot rise without our attending to them. So it's only when they catch our attention when the thought rises and takes our attention away from ourselves. If we turn our attention back to ourselves, the thought is deprived of our attention, so it ceases. So we don't have, that's why Bhagavan said, what does it matter however many thoughts arise? So what? Big deal. It's not something we shouldn't be concerned about thoughts at all. If we are concerned about thoughts, or so many thoughts are rising, where is our attention going? It's going towards the thoughts. Forget about the thoughts. Attend to yourself is what he's implying here. If we attend to ourselves, the thoughts will thereby be deprived of our attention and will automatically come to an end. They cannot rise without our attending to them. So we shouldn't be the least concerned about thoughts. Our aim is not to stop thinking. Our aim is only to attend to ourselves. If we attend only to ourselves, thinking will automatically stop. But if we're thinking, oh, I shouldn't be thinking, our attention is again on thoughts. We shouldn't allow our attention to be diverted away from ourselves towards thoughts at all. We should be completely unconcerned about thoughts. We should be concerned only about attending to ourselves. And then he says, very important sentence, when one practices, I'll read it in Tamil because it's such an important sentence. Ipiti paraka paraka manatiku tan pirapiditil tangi nikum shakti adikadi kindradu. That means when we practice and practice, when we practice and practice thus, or by practicing in this manner, the strength the strength of the mind to abide in its source will increase, in its birthplace will increase. That is, the more we persevere in turning our attention back to ourselves and trying to hold on to that mere awareness I am, by persevering in this practicing, by practicing more and more, he says, he doesn't say more and more, he says by practicing and practicing, by persevering in this practice, it implies, we gain more and more strength to abide in the source from which we've risen. The source from which we've risen is our own real nature. The rest of this paragraph is also important, but because of want of time, I'm going to leave it here and go on to the 10th paragraph, because the 10th and 11th paragraph is talking about what is the real problem. That is, why do thoughts arise? Thoughts are nothing but the sprouting of our Vishaya Vasanas. Vishaya Vasanas means our inclinations or our liking to experience Vishayas, to be aware of Vishayas. So long as we have Vishaya Vasana, there'll always be an inclination to go outwards, to attend to things other than ourselves. So the Vishaya Vasanas are the problem we're up against. So long as we have strong Vishaya Vasanas, they'll be tending to draw our attention away from ourselves. Our real enemy is ego. Ego is the root problem, but the vasanas are like the army of the ego. Ego is the general, the commander-in-chief, and but the commander-in-chief, if he's on his own, he's powerless. He can easily be defeated. He's strong. Why? Because of his army, and his army is the Vishaya Vasanas. So Vishaya Vasanas are the problem that we're up against when we're investigating ourselves. We all say, oh, I tried to investigate myself, but my thoughts keep on distracting me. I keep on thinking about other things. Why is that? The thoughts don't arise of their own accord. Thoughts arise because we think them. And why do we think them? Because we have that inclination to think them. the inclination is what Bhagavan describes as a vasana. So the Vishaya Vasana is the inclination towards Vishayas, towards things other than ourselves, towards the second and third persons, towards other thoughts, phenomena, forms. Anything other than ourselves is a Vishaya. So he says, even though Vishaya Vasanas, which come from time immemorial, rise in countless numbers like ocean waves, they will be destroyed when Swarupa Dhyana increases and increases. When Swarupa Dhyana increases and increases, all the vasanas will eventually be destroyed. What's he mean by Swarupa Dhyana? Swarupa means our own real nature. What is our real nature? That fundamental awareness I am. Dhyana means a meditation, contemplation, or attentiveness. So Swarupa Dhyana basically means self-attentiveness. That is, being attending only to our fundamental awareness I am. So when our practice of self-attentiveness increases and increases, implies increases in depth and intensity. In other words, when we go deeper and deeper in this self-attentiveness, all the vasanas will gradually be destroyed, and eventually they'll be totally destroyed. And in the next sentence, he says, without giving room even to the doubting thoughts, so many that bringing so many vasanas to an end, is it possible to be only as Swarupa, as my real nature? Is it possible for us to remain just as I am, and thereby destroy all vasanas without even giving room to that doubting thought? It is necessary to cling tenaciously to Swarupa's dhyana, to self-attentiveness. He says it very, very forcibly in Tamil. Swarupa dhyyanate, Swarupa dhyyanate vida pidiyai pidikavendam. Pidikavendam means it's necessary to cling to Swarupa dhyana. The adverb vida pidiyai, it means, vida means without leaving, pidiyai means clinging. So we need to cling unleavingly, clingingly to that. It's just a very emphatic and forceful way of saying in Tamil that he's saying, he's using pidi, the verb to cling, both as a verb, as an infinitive verb. It's necessary to cling. He's also using it as a adverb, pidi, and he's qualifying it vida pidi, without leaving at all. So clinging so firmly that we don't let go at all. It's necessary to cling to that self-attentiveness. That is, we shouldn't even allow that thought. Is it possible to remain as Swarupa and to thereby bring an end to all vasanas without even giving room to that thought? We have to cling firmly to self-attentiveness. And then in the next sentence, he gives a very great assurance. It's an assurance for all of us. However great a sinner one may be, if instead of lamenting and weeping, I am a sinner, how am I going to be saved? If one completely rejects the thought that one is a sinner and is zealous or steadfast in self-attentiveness, one will certainly be, in Tamil he says, Avan Nityamai Urupaduvan. Urupaduvan literally means one will take form or be reformed or be transformed. It's a metaphorical way of saying one will be saved. We will be transformed into our own real nature. We'll be restored back to our own Swarupa. We'll be restored to Swarupa, if we can take it. But it implies we'll be saved. So that is the nature of ego, is to have Vishaya Vasanas. And Vishaya Vasanas rise in the form of desires, and desires impel us to do all sorts of terrible things. Even if now we're not such a bad sinner, in the past we would have been a great sinner. Not necessarily in this lifetime, in previous lifetime. Even now we'll be doing small sins. It's inevitable so long as we rise as ego. The very rising of ego is itself a sin. So however great a sinner we may be, even if we're the worst of worst sinners, doesn't matter. Give up the thought that one is a sinner. Who is it who says I am a sinner? It is ego. So we need to break that identification. We need to no longer identify ourselves as I am a sinner. We need to cling to merely to I am. Leave the sinner bit. Cling only to I am. In the thought I am a sinner, what is real? Only I am. Sinner is unreal. So leave the thought I am a sinner. Cling only to the thought. Cling only to the I am portion of I am a sinner. If we cling to that, we will certainly be saved. So it doesn't matter, whatever worst type of person we may be, we should cling only to ourselves, to that fundamental awareness I am. We should hold fast to this Swarupa Dhyana, this self-attentiveness. We will certainly be saved. That's a very, very great assurance. So that's the 10th paragraph. In the 11th paragraph, he continues on the same subject. As long as Vishaya Vasanas exist within the mind, so long is the investigation, who am I, necessary. It's important here to remember why Bhagavan is talking, to remember what he said in the first paragraph. Why is Bhagavan talking about this investigation, who am I? Why is this investigation, who am I, so necessary? Because what is it we're all seeking? We all want to be happy. If we want to be happy, this is the way. But why we have Vishaya Vasanas? Because we have a wrong discrimination, but happiness lies outside ourselves. So long as we believe that happiness lies outside ourselves, we'll have the inclination to go outwards. So that inclination to go outwards is so strong. So long as the Vishaya Vasanas, the inclination to go outwards, to go towards Vishayas, exists in the mind, so long is the investigation, who am I, necessary. In other words, we can say it, so long as ego survives, this investigation is necessary. Why? Because it's the very nature of the ego to have Vishaya Vasanas. By this practice of self-investigation and self-surrender, we are weakening the Vishaya Vasanas, but we cannot get rid of the Vishaya Vasanas completely without getting rid of their root. And the root is ego. But so first, the general ego, field marshal, is ego. He is in the center of this army of Vishaya Vasanas. Our aim is to kill only that general. If we kill him, then all the Vishaya Vasanas, or the army will disperse. But in order to kill the general, we need to get at him. And in order to get at him, we need to a very large extent, weaken his army. Only when his army is much weakened can we actually catch the rogue and finish him off. So that is what Bhagavan is implying here. So long as Vishaya Vasanas exist within the mind, so long the investigation, who am I, is necessary. So we need to persevere in clinging to self-attentiveness until all the Vasanas are destroyed, along with their root ego, is the implication. And then he says, as and when thoughts appear. Thoughts are what? Thoughts are nothing but the sprouted form of Vishaya Vasanas. Vasanas sprout as thoughts. They manifest as thoughts. So as and when thoughts appear, then and there it is necessary to annihilate them all by vicharana in the very place from which they rise. What does he mean by annihilate them in the very place from which they rise? That is, thoughts rise from ourselves. If we allow the thought to rise, and by following it, it'll take us away from ourselves. In the very place from which it rises is at its very source, in ourself, that is, before the thought leads our attention away from it ourselves, in the very place from which it's arisen, we need to destroy it. How do we destroy it? By vicharana. Vicharana, what he refers to here as vicharana, investigation, is what he referred to in the previous paragraph as Swarupa Dhyana. That is by self-attentiveness. By clinging to self-attentiveness, we are thereby destroying the thoughts as and when they rise. In the very place, so as and when thoughts appear, then and there, in the very place from which they rise, it's necessary to annihilate all of them. So that means we need to cling to self-attentiveness so firmly, but we don't allow the thoughts to lead our attention away from ourselves. If our attention is led away from ourselves, what do? We turn our attention back to ourselves. To whom did this thought appear? To me. We bring our attention back to ourselves. We don't have to ask the question, but that is the clue Bhagavan gave us to help us to bring our attention quickly back to ourselves. That is, whatever thought we may be thinking, we are always aware of, I am thinking this. So forget the thought, cling to the I am, the thinker of the thought. Attend to the thinker, not to the thoughts. And then he goes on to say, not attending to anya. Anya means anything other. It implies anything other than ourselves. Not attending to anything other than oneself is vairagya or nirasa. Vairagya and nirasa, they both mean more or less the same. Nirasa means desirelessness. Asa is desire, nirasa is freedom from desire. Vairagya means freedom from passion. It implies the same thing. We can translate vairagya here as dispassion or detachment, and nirasa as desirelessness, but both words amount to the same thing. So not attending to anything other than ourselves, that alone is vairagya or nirasa. Not leaving or not letting go of oneself is jnana. Holding firmly to the swarupa dhyana, that is jnana, that is the real awareness. In truth, these two, vairagya and jnana, are one. That is, holding on to ourselves and not attending. Holding on to ourselves means, or not letting go of ourselves means attending to ourselves, and thereby not attending to other things. That is not attending to ourselves is itself not attending to other things. That's why he says this vairagya and jnana are one and the same. How to maintain that vairagya? Only by holding on to ourselves. So if we let go of ourselves, our attention automatically goes off towards other things. So it's by holding on to ourselves, but we prevent our attention going away towards other things. And so the vairagya and jnana are one and the same thing. And then he uses a beautiful analogy. Just as pearl divers tying stones to their waists and sinking pick up pearls that are lying at the bottom of the ocean, so each one, sinking deep within oneself with vairagya, may obtain the Atma-mutu. Atma-mutu means the pearl of Atman. That is our own real nature, it implies. Here he says, sinking deep within oneself with vairagya. The analogy here is just like the stones that the pearl divers tie to their waist. If they don't tie stones to their waist, they won't be able to sink deep enough to reach for pearls. The vairagya is like that. The stones that the pearl divers tie to their waist. That is, we need intense vairagya in order to sink into ourselves strongly. Intense vairagya means Bhagavan says it means not attending to other things. That means not yielding to the Vishaya Vasanas. When we yield to the Vishaya Vasanas, we get carried outwards. If we want to sink deep within, we mustn't yield to those Vishaya Vasanas. So we need to have that intense vairagya. We need to cling firmly to ourselves without allowing ourselves to be swayed by the Vishaya, to be dragged outwards by the Vishaya Vasanas. That is and if we do so, if we cling to ourselves firmly enough, we will sink deep within, and thereby we will attain the pearl of our own real nature, the Atma-mutu. Here, Atman is used in the sense of Atma-swarupa, our own real nature. And then in the next sentence, he gives a very nice assurance. He says, I'll read it in Tamil because it's a very beautiful sentence. Oruvan tan surupate adeyum vari yil nirantara surupa smaraneye kai patru vanayan adu andre podam. That means if one clings fast to uninterrupted Swarupa Smarana. Narantara Swarupa Smarana. Swarupa Smarana means, Smarana literally means remembrance. So Swarupa Smarana is remembrance of our real nature, or self-remembrance. It implies the same as Swarupa Dhyana, self-attentiveness. So if we cling fast to uninterrupted Nirantara Swarupa Smarana, until one obtains Swarupa, until we merge back in and as our own real nature is what it implies, Adu Andre Podum, that alone is sufficient. So all we have to do is to cling fast to this Swarupa Smarana or Swarupa Dhyana, that is this self-attentiveness. We hold on to that self-attentiveness without letting go of it, that alone is sufficient. Of course, in the midst of our day-to-day activities, it seems that our attention, but other things demand our attention. But even when we're attending to other things, we should be trying to hold on to a background remembrance of ourselves. In the midst of whatever else we may be thinking about or attending to, we shouldn't forget ourselves. We should try to hold on uninterruptedly to that remembrance of our fundamental awareness, I am. That is what he means here. And if we do so, that alone is sufficient. And then in the last paragraph, he again, last two sentences, he again gives two analogies. This is the analogy to which I was hinting at when I first started talking about this paragraph, about the, I said the ego is like the general, and the Vasanas are like the soldiers, the foot soldiers. We need to kill a great number of the soldiers in order to be able to catch the general and execute the general. So Bhagavan uses a similar analogy here. He said, so long as enemies are within the fortress, they will continue coming out from it. Here, the enemies that he's referring to are the Vishaya Vasanas. The fortress is our own heart, our own real nature. So long as they keep on popping out from within, so long as they're there, so long as we still have Vishaya Vasanas in our heart, they'll continue popping out. They'll continue coming out. That is, if you're besieging a fortress, you're starving the people inside. So the soldiers inside the fortress are not going to just remain quiet and starve to death because they've got no food or water or anything. They need to defend themselves. So they keep on coming out in order to try to get food and water. So they keep on coming out. If as and when they come out, you cut them down, eventually you'll be able to just walk. They'll become so weak you can just walk into a fort and take the fortress. The fortress will be yours. So long as enemies are within the fortress, they'll be continuously coming out from it. Why are they coming out? Because vasanas cannot live without the food and water of our attention. So they're constantly demanding our attention. So they come out in order to get our attention. How do we cut them down? By not attending to them, attending only to ourselves. Thereby we are cutting them down. So, and then he says in the next sentence, if one is continuously cutting down all of them, as and when they come, the fortress will eventually be captured. So in this last sentence, the last two sentences, he's using only an analogy. He's not saying what it's analogous to, but in the context, it's very clear. The enemies are the Vishaya Vasanas. They keep on coming out in order to gain our attention, because it's only our attention is what feeds and nourishes them. So if we deny them our attention by attending only to ourselves, we are thereby cutting them down. And if we continue cutting them down, the remaining vasanas in our heart become weaker and weaker and weaker because they're being deprived of our attention. And eventually we'll be able to enter the heart and catch that rogue, this ego, and execute him. How do we execute him? Merely by being aware of ourselves as we actually are. That is, when we attend to ourselves more and more and more, as the Vishaya Vasanas become weaker, we'll be able to turn more and more close to 180 degrees, away from other things, back towards ourselves. When the Vishaya Vasanas have become sufficiently weak, we'll be able to turn the full 180 degrees. When we turn 180 degrees, we are facing ourselves alone. We've turned our back, so to speak, on all other things. So what are we aware of? We're aware of ourself alone. Being aware of ourself alone is pure awareness, because pure awareness means awareness that is aware of nothing other than itself. So when we see ourself alone, that is Swarupa, what Bhagavan referred to earlier as Swarupa Darshana. Swarupa Darshana means seeing ourself alone, seeing our real nature. When we see ourself alone, we will thereby merge in that, because ego is nothing but the false awareness, I am this body. When we are aware only of I am, ego ceases to be ego, and we remain as I am. This is what Bhagavan describes in verse 16 of Upadēśa Undiyār. Veli videngale vittu, manam tan oliuru ordale undipara, unme unichiam undipara. Leaving external Vishayas, the mind knowing its own form of light. Its own form of light is that fundamental awareness I am, because that is the light that illumines the mind and enables it to know all other things. So the mind knowing its own form of light is unme unity, is real awareness. How can the mind know its own form of light? As soon as the mind knows its own form of light, it ceases to be mind and remains as that form of light. In other words, the ego gets dissolved as soon as it sees its own real nature. So that is the implication there. In Sanskrit, that verse is Drisya Varitam, Chittum, Atmanaha Chitva. Chittam here means the mind knowing its own chitva, its own awareness. That is what he refers to in Tamil as a form of light, its own awareness. Its own awareness means that fundamental awareness I am, the awareness of our own existence, such it. So the mind knowing its own awareness, that is tattva darshanam, that is seeing that. But how does the mind know its own awareness? As soon as the mind knows its own awareness, it is no longer a mind, it becomes that awareness. The knower of Brahman becomes Brahman. In other words, when we see ourselves as we actually are, we will see that we were always that. It's not, though it is said the knower of Brahman becomes Brahman, it's not literally a matter of becoming. When we see ourselves as Brahman, we see that we were always Brahman. So we remain as we actually are. So I've talked for quite a long time, but would anyone like to ask any questions now?
So we have one question from Neeraji.
Oh, I see. Does the silent chanting of I intensify Swarupa Dhyana? This clue that Bhagavan gave us to repeat I, or you say silent chanting, that means chanting within the mind. That is the aim of this. We need to be very clear about what is the aim. Why are we repeating I? As I said earlier, when we mention any word, it brings every word refers to something. If Delhi, it refers to something. Ramana, it refers to something. Just like that, I refers to something. When we say the name Ramana, for example, we are reminded about Bhagavan. We remember his loving face, his kind eyes. We remember his teachings. We remember so many things. Just like the word Ramana brings Bhagavan to our remembrance. When we say I, we need to say it it's in a very deep and contemplative way. We need to think of I. We need to think not just of the word, but what does this word denote? What is it in me that is denoted by this word I? So if we repeat I slowly and trying to attend to that fundamental awareness, which is denoted by the word I, that is a very good aid. But as Bhagavan says in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, what he says in verse 29 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is Nānendru Vayal Naviladu, without even saying I by mouth. By mouth also means here, literally it means by mouth, but even it means even mentally, we shouldn't be repeating the word. It's useful at first, but in order to go deep within, we need to leave that word. That word I is useful to direct our attention back towards ourselves. But then we have to let go of that word. So what he says in this verse 29 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, not saying I by mouth, investigating by an inward sinking mind, where one rises as I, alone is the path of knowledge. Jnana neri. Jnana neri means jnana marga, the path of knowledge. So our aim is to sink deep within. In order to sink deep within, we need to let go of all thoughts, all words. So the word I, that is meditating on what is denoted by the word I, is a very good starting point. But at a certain point in our practice, we must, once we become familiar with that, with what it is, what Swarupa dhyana actually is, what it actually is to be self-attentive, the word is no longer necessary. If repeating the name Ramana is a very good aid to bring the loving name and form of Bhagavan to our mind. But after some time, the name drops off and our whole attention is only on his form. In the same way, the word I is a very good aid to bring our attention back towards ourselves. But in order to go deep in this self-attentiveness, we need to let this word drop off, and we need to go deep into that which is denoted by this word I. That's why Bhagavan says, investigating by an inward sinking mind, where one rises as I. From where do we rise as I? We rise only from ourselves, from our real nature, from that fundamental awareness that I am. We rise as I am so-and-so. I am this person. So ego rises from the fundamental awareness I am. So investigating with an inward sinking mind where this I rises means investigating the fundamental awareness I am. And for that, the mind needs to sink deep within, just like he said about in that pearl diver analogy. With vairagya, we need to sink deep within ourselves by clinging so firmly to self-attentiveness, we don't even give room to the rising of the thought I, the word I. It's only the inward sinking into that into that awareness that is denoted by the word I. Does that help? Does that make it clear?
Yes, thank you, Michael. Thank you.
So once again, a very, very warm thank you for all your wonderful teachings. And
today I haven't said anything. I've just been saying what Bhagavan has said. I've been quoting Bhagavan's words throughout, because who can say it better than Bhagavan? Bhagavan says it so beautifully and so clearly.
Very true, sir. Very true.
All we need to do is be constantly reminding us of this, because what are all Bhagavan's teachings? They're all pointing in one direction and one direction alone. They're turning our attention back towards ourselves, because it's only by attending to ourselves that we can know ourselves as we actually are. What we actually are is the infinite ocean of happiness. So to merge in that infinite, merge in and as that infinite ocean of happiness, all we need to do is to cling firmly to Swarupa dhyana.
Very true.
So simple, so simple, Bhagavan's teachings.